This dog was moments away from being put down, his life already written off by many. But then, an unexpected twist would change everything. One elderly man stepped in and did something that would not only save this dog's life, but change both of their futures forever. Here's what happened next. The dog was an older German Shepherd, his fur a bit matted, his eyes dull with sadness. He had been at the shelter for months, passed over again and again by potential adopters. His name was Max, but the staff often referred to him as the Forgotten One. Max had a past, a tough one that no one knew the full details of, but it was clear he'd been through more than any dog should. He was skittish, fearful, and he had a hard time trusting people, making him hard to adopt. The shelter, Max was known as unadoptable. His withdrawn nature and hesitation to connect with people made him a challenge. Staff members had tried everything, but nothing seemed to help him open up. His time at the shelter had taken its toll. Max was tired, and everyone knew the shelter had no room for dogs who weren't a good fit. As the days went by, the shelter staff started preparing for Max's fate. His time was running out. John was a quiet, elderly man who had lived alone for the past few years. A widower in his early 70s, he spent his days walking in the park, reading books, and reminiscing about the days when he had a family around him. His children had grown and moved away, and his wife had passed several years earlier. While John enjoyed his peaceful life, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something that would bring a little more joy into his everyday routine. One day, while walking through town, he passed by a local animal shelter. He paused, noticing a flyer that advertised "Adopt, don't shop." A simple message, but one that stirred something inside him. The thought of giving an animal a home had crossed his mind many times, but he always hesitated, unsure if he could handle the responsibility. However, today something felt different. John decided to visit the shelter. As he walked through the front door, he was greeted by the eager faces of dogs in every kennel, each one hoping for a second chance. But there, in the back of the room, was a dog who barely even looked up as he entered. Max, the German Shepherd, sat quietly in the corner, a distant look in his eyes. John felt an immediate pull toward him, and something inside him told him this was the dog he was meant to help. John stood there for a long moment, watching Max in silence. The German Shepherd's eyes, though tired, seemed to track his every move, but there was no excitement, no wagging tail, just an overwhelming sadness. John could sense the pain and mistrust radiating from him. He had seen that same look in the eyes of other animals who had been through too much, too many rejections, too much uncertainty. And just like those animals, Max seemed to have resigned himself to his fate. John hesitated. He had always loved dogs, but he was older now, and the thought of taking on a dog who might be difficult to manage made him pause. He had spent his life taking care of others, but could he take care of a dog who was so broken? He wasn't sure, but there was something about Max that tugged at John's heart. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the look in the dog's eyes, or the way Max seemed to quietly accept the idea of being left behind, forgotten. John asked one of the shelter workers about the dog, and she sighed deeply. He's been here for months. We've tried everything. He's not really adoptable. John nodded, but deep down, he knew that wasn't going to stop him. After a few moments, he found himself asking, "Is he available for adoption?" The worker seemed surprised, but also hopeful. "Yes, but it won't be easy." "Are you sure?" John didn't answer right away, but in his heart, he knew the answer. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm sure." The first few days after John brought Max home were a quiet struggle. Max, though no longer in the shelter, seemed just as distant and uneasy as he had been behind those bars. He didn't immediately warm up to John. In fact, he barely acknowledged him at all. Max would only follow John around the house reluctantly, staying a few feet away, as if he were afraid that any close contact might result in more pain. When John sat on the couch, Max would lie down in a corner, his body curled tightly, eyes alert, but not trusting enough to come closer. John didn't mind the silence at first. He knew that trust wasn't something that could be rushed. Each day, he would quietly go about his routine, offering Max food and water, always keeping his voice soft and reassuring. But no matter what John did, Max wouldn't accept affection. He wouldn't let John pet him or even sit too close. It was as if he feared any sign of human contact would lead to more disappointment, more hurt. John, however, refused to give up. Every evening, he'd sit on the floor beside Max, close enough to show he was there, but far enough to give Max space. He would read aloud softly, hoping the sound of his voice would bring comfort. Max would watch him, his ears flicking at every word, but still, no sign of affection. It was painful for John, who had hoped to fill his home with companionship, but he understood that trust was earned, not given freely. Slowly, over time, Max started to show small signs of progress. He began to eat a little more freely, his body not as tense. Then one day, without warning, Max nudged his nose against John's hand. It was barely a touch, but it was enough to make John's heart swell with hope. This was a start. They both had a long road ahead, but this moment was a sign that maybe, just maybe, they were on the right path. Weeks passed, and with each day, Max's behavior started to shift, albeit slowly. It wasn't immediate, but there was an undeniable change in him. Max, who had once cowered at every sound, began to stand a little taller. His tail, which had been tucked firmly between his legs, began to wag, tentatively at first, then with more confidence as the days wore on. He no longer flinched every time John moved around the room. One morning, John woke to the sound of soft paw steps beside his bed. Max was standing there, watching him, a glimmer of curiosity in his eyes. The moment was small, but it was monumental. John reached out slowly, and for the first time, Max didn't shy away. He took a tentative step forward, nuzzling John's hand, allowing the touch. It was as if the weight of months of neglect had begun to lift off of him. From there, things started to improve rapidly. Max began seeking John out. He'd sit by the door when John was preparing breakfast, his eyes focused, waiting for John to acknowledge him. The first time Max playfully nudged a ball toward John, his tail wagging with excitement. It was a breakthrough moment. The dog that had once been withdrawn and fearful was beginning to trust again. Max started to join John on walks, something he had resisted at first. They walked through the neighborhood together, Max's pace steady, his head held high. The people they passed couldn't help but notice the change in Max. The once silent dog, who barely looked anyone in the eye, was now proudly walking beside his new best friend. John couldn't help but smile as he watched Max grow into the dog he knew he could be. He hadn't just saved Max's life. Max had saved him, too. Each step they took together was a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they could go. John had decided to take Max to the park, a place they had visited often. The park was usually peaceful, but today it was bustling with families, children playing, and other dogs barking in the distance. Max, who had never been comfortable around crowds or loud noises, stiffened as they approached the entrance. John could feel Max's unease. He stayed calm, speaking softly to his dog. "It's okay, Max. We're just going to take it slow, all right?" Max's tail remained tucked, and his steps became slower. John paused, giving the dog the space to decide whether he wanted to proceed. Max hesitated for a moment. Then, to John's surprise, he took a step forward, his ears flicking toward the distant sounds of laughter and shouting. Another step, then another, until Max was walking with John right into the middle of the park. It wasn't perfect. Max's body was still tense, and his eyes darted nervously from side to side. But he was moving forward, choosing to trust John instead of retreating. That a dog ran past them, barking loudly, and for a brief moment, Max froze. But instead of panicking, he looked up at John. "It's all right, buddy," John said gently, his voice a steady anchor. Slowly, Max exhaled, his tail giving a small wag. The dog had passed his final test. He had chosen to face his fears, and in doing so, he had proven just how far he had come. John smiled, proud of Max. They had both conquered something that seemed impossible just a few months ago.